Thank you. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Shirley, we've heard from numerous stakeholders over the last few months that the Marine Mammal Protection Act desperately needs reform. What do you think is the most important reform we could make to the MMPA?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. And again, the discussion draft that's being looked at and all that entails, I've been able to take a deep dive into that, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. This is a very, as has been stated by everyone, a very important act. Has led efforts for over 50 years on how we're going to do that. And I think as I read the bill, having some flexibility built in there on how the service can work with partners and work with industry to be able to conserve marine mammal populations and continue to thrive honestly, and how we do that is the part that I think we can continue to work on.
Okay. One of the issues that we continually hear about is unnecessary delay in the issuance of incidental take regulations or incidental harassment authorizations. How important is it for this process to work in a timely manner?
Yeah, again, as has been mentioned, the Fish and Wildlife Service does not want to be the reason why projects are being held up or things are not moving forward or communities are struggling. We need to make sure that we do our job and make sure that it's done effectively and do it in a timely manner. And I think that's all part of some of what we can be looking at in this draft.
So over the last couple of years of being in Congress, working on grizzly delisting primarily, one of the things that has struck me is that a lot of people do not understand how the Endangered Species Act or even the MMPA actually work, and especially with the Endangered Species Act. For example, with the grizzly bear recovery, they were listed as threatened in 1975. Recovery goal was around 500 bears. We met that almost 3 decades ago. We have over 1,100 bears. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is actually saturated with bears, according to the previous administration's Fish and Wildlife Service. They've moved well beyond their historical range, creating numerous problems in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. And one of the reasons that I give a little bit of this background is the state of Wyoming has spent over $1 million on grizzly bear recovery, whereas the Fish and Wildlife Service, in contrast, has spent perhaps thousands on recovery. The state of Wyoming has over 9 individuals in the Game and Fish Department dedicated specifically to grizzly bear recovery and protection, which demonstrates that it's typically the states that are actually managing this wildlife and protecting these wildlife species and populations. We don't have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Fish and Wildlife Service folks out on the ground in Wyoming or Nebraska or Montana or Colorado or Utah. It's actually the state agencies like where you came from. You served for decades as the state wildlife manager, and isn't it true that states have a trust responsibility, actually an actual trust responsibility to effectively manage wildlife for future generation, which includes providing accurate and transparent data related to the health of wildlife populations? Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
And would you agree with me that in terms of wildlife management, it is typically the states, even when we're dealing with an endangered or threatened species, that takes the primary role in making sure we're protecting those species?
Yeah, again, as you mentioned, my experience there, and again, the service in my role in Utah has been a great contributing partner, but bottom line is the work is landing at the state level to get those things done. And we've had good relationships there and been able to get things done. And that's been important, but we also need to be cognizant of how the act is used, and that when we meet recovery goals or come up with plans or work with our constituents, we need to be fair to that process and make sure it's equitable in what we're asking them to do, as well as we're going to hold up our part of the bargain there.
Well, I assume that you have had the opportunity to actually work on certain wildlife management plans in your career. And in doing so, you developed those, your office developed those to make sure that you could protect a recovered population of whatever that species might be. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. In Utah itself, there's a Virgin River recovery program. There's a June sucker recovery program. There's a Utah prairie recovery, prairie dog not Prairie itself, the Prairie Dog Recovery Program. And all those are state of Utah employees that are working on the ground to make those things
So
happen.
with that in mind, shouldn't Congress and the service ensure that the states as well as tribes and local governments are included at all stages of the ESA decision-making process?
Yes, I think that's the goal.
All right, thank you very much for that.